Hi, I'm Roger Siminoff. Ever since 1973, when the first edition of my mandolin construction manual came out, the various editions contain numerous color photographs on doing staining, coloring, and grain enhancement. It always troubled me that the still photographs didn't tell the whole story. Now with video, I can show you how to do it real time. Come on with me and let's get started. Curly figure is a phenomenon in woods that is caused by the tree's trunk or limb being bent to one side. The bend causes the wood's grain to buckle, giving it a striped or curly figure. This buckling is similar to what happens at your wrist when you bend your hand forward. While curly figure can occur in almost any wood, it is most prominent in sugar maple, Acer saccharum, because of the high sap content. As shown in this diagram, the wavy grain presents areas of the wood surface where the cells or pores are closed. And there are areas of the wood surface where the cells are open. The open or porous part of the wood absorbs dyes and coloring agents more quickly than the closed cells. For building figure contrast, to make the figure stand out, we will be wiping on dyes that will load the open cells, or porous part of the wood, while at the same time wiping the dyes off the closed cells. The result will be a beautiful, visually dynamic, and well-crafted appearance. For our process, we're going to need paper towels, denatured alcohol, nitrile gloves or surgical gloves, a screw eye that's 1/4 inch by 6 or 8 inches. I'll show you why in a moment. An apron, of course, to keep yourself clean, some cloth or paper towel swabs, and Fibings leather dyes. Fibings leather dyes are aniline dyes and they are permanent, which is why I'd like you to use nitrile or surgical gloves for this process. The colors we will be using are medium brown, dark brown, yellow, chocolate, and a black they call USMC black. These dyes mix beautifully with denatured alcohol. Regarding the screw eye I mentioned previously, align your tailpiece where it will go and drill a hole where the end pin will go. Insert the screw eye into this hole. The screw eye will act as a handle during the entire finishing process and will allow you to hang up the instrument when the finish is drying. Paper towels will work well as swabs. Use a full sheet and fold it over a few times. Keep your swabs of alcohol, light stains, and dark stains separate. Our first step is to check for blemishes or residual glue. Use denatured alcohol and wipe the entire instrument, looking for areas that need further sanding or attention. This is also a good opportunity to see where the figure will be prominent. Now we're ready for a light coloring coat. Mix about 1/4 of light brown with 3/4 denatured alcohol in a little jar. And apply a coat on the entire instrument and working it into all the little areas, especially up around the scroll. And then of course apply color to the rim as well. Once you do the light coloring coat, you'll probably find there are some areas that need further attention that just didn't show up when you were doing the alcohol step. So sand them out now and use 600 or 800 grade paper and get rid of those scratches. And go back and let's apply another coat of the light coloring coat. Double check your instrument again. Go around the rim, of course. And let's work on to the neck. And the edges of the peg head as we go. Check your work carefully as you go along and be sure to get stain in all the areas, especially around the edges of the peg head and that area in the middle of the scroll. You'll have to fold your towel and scrub it back and forth in the opening around the scroll. Don't be afraid to go over the binding, and if you get color on it, it's not a problem. We're going to scrape the binding clean after we get our first finishing coat, our lacquer or whatever kind of finish you're using, once we get that on to lock down the color. So now that we have our first light coat on and we've done it evenly, we're going to begin to darken the edges of the soundboard and the backboard. We want to shade them so that they're darker around the rim and lighter in the center. And as you learned earlier in the video, we'll be doing this by adding finish to the areas we want to darken and rubbing finish off the areas we want to lighten, which will take the finish off the side grain of the wood, while the dyes end up going into the open pores end of the wood. Notice how I'm holding the bottle of dye away from the instrument as I'm pouring it onto my coloring rag. You certainly don't want to get a big blob of dye on the soundboard or the backboard. Now occasionally take another swab and wet it with denatured alcohol and start rubbing the center of the soundboard to remove dye from that area, and then feather out to the edge so that you're constantly taking color away from the center and moving it to the outside. And keep coloring and building contrast as you go around the entire instrument. We want to work all parts with the same level of dye at the same time, building up the color everywhere equally. Now we're going to start adding a much darker coat. This is about a 25% dye to 75% alcohol. And I know you can see the edges, but watch what happens as we rub it. Those edges go away. Even these marks you see here that may look ugly for a moment, they're going to all get feathered in as we continue to work this top. And we'll build the shaded area so it feathers to the outside of the instrument, and the center of the instrument will be a much lighter tone, giving us a good sunburst. Keep rubbing that center area to have it go away. Now you can see I'm applying some alcohol to rub away the center, and that's starting to really show up beautifully. Now we have a coloring finish we're going to add to the soundboard, just as we did with the backboard. And going back again to lighten the backboard in the center area with some more alcohol. And some more dark finish to go around. Just a continuous process of building color and removing color, and keep everything moving. And especially when it's wet like this, you want to move sort of quickly so that nothing gets stuck there too much. There we go. Another light wipe on the center starts to really bring out the shading of this instrument. Oh my goodness. Beautiful backboard. This is California big leaf maple, by the way. Here we're working on this F5. Let's take a look at the areas that will be shaded dark. In the Florentine art style that this instrument represents, it was typical that areas that were recessed were darkened. We see this on a lot of early furniture. And areas that were raised or protruded from the instrument or furniture were lightened. So looking at this instrument, looking at the body and going around clockwise, we see at the top that the inset part of the concave part where the scroll comes onto the body, that'll be dark. Going up around the neck heel, the areas around the neck heel will be dark. On either side of the upper body point, those will be dark. On either side of the lower body point will be dark. And at the tailpiece area, that'll be dark. And then on the peg head, the two points of the bottom of the peg head, those will be dark. The little scroll and the big scroll will be darkened, especially on the inside. And the very tip of the peg head, that will be dark as well. So I'm now using a really dark solution of color. I've added some black to that last solution I had of the dark brown and alcohol solution, and I'm only adding it now to the areas, the recessed areas or the points that need to be darkened. Even though I'm wiping the whole neck here, you'll see I've already added color to the darkened area, the neck heel and the back of the peg head. Just keep working it into all the areas as you go along. And now we'll take some more alcohol and we're going to wipe off the center here to bring up the highlight in the center of the neck in the areas that are not to be darkened. Really starting to show up nicely here in this instrument. Continue around the neck. And around the highlighted area of the rib. I thought it would be nice to show some examples of how our figure and coloring compares to some other instruments. This instrument is a 1924 Gibson F5 mandolin. It's a lore-signed instrument, and in fact you might enjoy knowing that this was Lloyd's personal F5. It was in my collection for about 30 years. The wood is Michigan sugar maple. Take a look at the coloring and the shading. Notice how dark it gets near the rim. This instrument is now on display at the Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix, Arizona. Here's an F5 mandolin I did back in 2011. This is the mandolin that was colored during this video. This wood is California bigleaf maple, which typically has remarkable figure. Of course, the species of wood plays a role in the dynamics of the figure. Here is a backboard coloring sample whose base half, the upper half in this photo, is red maple and the treble or lower half is sugar maple. The sample board was bound to help appreciate the visual contrast of the coloring. This instrument is one of the three 1978 F5L prototypes that I was involved in building when we were at Gibson. This particular backboard is interesting. If you look at the very straight grain here, or the very straight figure I should say, this backboard is actually sycamore. Sycamore is very similar to maple, except it has very, very straight figure. And this instrument was shaded using a shading gun process where the coloring coats were built up in subsequent layers of the clear lacquer finish that had a coloring agent in it. You certainly do not have to do a vignette and a sunburst. You could do the entire instrument in one color. It would look fine, and you could do the grain enhancement without doing the vignette or the shading to the edge. I mentioned sunburst earlier. Actually, a sunburst goes from a yellow center to a reddish perimeter. Here is an H4 mandola I built in 2013. It was colored in Fibing's medium brown, and I used the figure enhancement method shown in this video without shading it to dark along the edges. Here's the soundboard side of that H4 mandola. This coloring is similar to a sunburst. Notice how the shading goes from a golden center to a warm brown as it reaches the rim. The warm brown was achieved using Fibing's chocolate dyes. So now I'm going to use an airbrush to spray on some very diluted USMC black around the edges and just a very light coloring coat to darken and enhance the shadow areas of the instrument. This airbrush has a little cup on it that holds about a drop of the black and a whole lot of denatured alcohol. You can see I'm very lightly going around the areas here. This really enhances the edges beautifully and helps really build the shape of this instrument. It looks strange here without its binding being scraped. We'll get to that in a moment. Now that the coloring is done, I'm going to lock down the colored surfaces with one coat of clear acrylic lacquer. The lacquer is also going to help during the process of scraping the binding because it's going to be this one coat of lacquer and the dyes under it that will be scraping off during the binding and scraping process. Using a single edge razor blade, we're going to scrape the binding and going to position that razor blade in our fingers so that our fingers actually are a depth gauge, so that the razor blade can only go into the wood and binding so far and that we don't scrape into the wood, just into the binding. Here are some tips to help you with your coloring. First, use masking tape to protect your fretboard from stain. You will notice that I kept the masking tape on during the final spraying of the lacquer finish. There are many combinations of colors and you'll just have to do some testing and experimenting to find a combination you like. I called out yellow and chocolate initially in my list of colors. I added a touch of yellow in the center of both the soundboard and backboard to give the center a bit more pop. And I used a small amount of chocolate when darkening near the rim. Using 000 or 4O steel wool is a great way to reduce color, especially in the center of the boards. You can use the steel wool either dry or wetted with alcohol. Obviously, wetted steel wool cuts through the colored surface more quickly. Next, to prevent scratching your instrument, work on a well-padded surface or on your lap as I did. It is a good idea to test all dyes and my suggested percentages of dilution on other pieces of wood before applying them to your instrument and make any adjustments necessary. Lastly, as you saw on the sample board I showed, experiment and practice. There are many colors and combinations of colors to consider. Well, I hope you enjoyed the process. It's pretty easy to do and fun too. And I thought you might want to see what the final instrument looks like once the binding was scraped and the instrument was lacquered. You can see the shaded area and the recesses, how pretty that looks. Here's the backboard, and you saw it being colored and shaded. Came out pretty fine, I think. Thanks for doing it with me.